The 12 barges appeared at the edge of Sector 9 Delta at 04:17 Standard, and the defense grid's first response was to file them under routine transit. Lieutenant Commander Samira Osai watched the tactical display from the bridge of the lead barge, her daughter's photograph taped inside her helmet where only she could see it. The screen showed 16 Kavani defense platforms ahead, each one a silent mountain of directed energy arrays and Class 12+ shielding. Her hands were steady. They had been steady for 287 years of planning. 12 vessels, 380 meters each, Class 2.8 shields, unarmed by every scan the Kavani had developed in 8,000 years, and moving in a formation that no construction fleet had ever used. The prohibition said nothing about bridges. That was the point. Samira keyed her comm. Stillwater Actual, this is Barge 1, formation holding, all green. Copy Barge 1, Pete Yarrow's voice came back, rough with the same zero-G rasp his grandfather had passed down. 12 green lights, 12 bridge modules, locked and aligned. Samira looked at the photograph. Her daughter was 7. She liked drawing animals with chalk on the observation deck. Samira had told her once years ago that Mommy was building something. The girl had asked if it was a ship. Samira had said no. She had not explained further. Some promises were too long to tell. I wish I could tell you it ended there. It didn't. Stay close. 287 years earlier, the prohibition chamber smelled of ozone and old stone. 3,000 luminescence orbs hung in the dark, casting pale light on walls carved with 12,000 species names. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor was black basalt, polished by 8,000 years of verdicts. Ambassador Yira Tolan stood in the single row of human representatives, 34 years old, gray already at her temples, a silver ring on her right hand that had belonged to her grandmother. Earth metal, 400 years old. She did not protest. She did not negotiate. Kale Voss stood at the center of the circular floor. His obsidian carapace reflected the pale blue light of the orbs. He had presided over 12,000 judgments. He had never been wrong. His voice carried the weight of institutions that had never been challenged. The warship prohibition is enacted, he said, effective immediately. All human vessels exceeding Class 2.8 shielding or bearing directed energy weapons are hereby classified as prohibited technology. Compliance will be verified. Yira Tolan stepped forward. She took the pen from her pocket, a pen from Earth, not the standardized stylus the conclave provided. She signed in blue ink. The signature was small. The moment was quiet. Behind her, the 12th human representative, an elderly woman whose hands trembled, refused to look at the document after signing. She stared at the floor instead, at the black basalt, at the 12,000 names that had come before. Ambassador Droon Korvathi, 1,200 years old, shifted his weight. It was the first hint of unease in a chamber that had never known it. That night, in a vault on Earth, 12 human representatives placed a document in a room that smelled of old paper and black tea. It was 12 pages long. It was never translated into galactic languages. It was read aloud every year on the anniversary. The Carpenter's Oath did not mention warships. It mentioned tools. Samira Osai checked the tactical feed again. The defense platforms had not moved. They had not hailed. They were simply watching, the way they had watched for 287 years. Stillwater Actual, she said. Barge 2 reports harmonic coupling at 94%. Barge 3 at 97%. Copy? Yarrow's voice was calm. Too calm. His grandfather had dropped a tea thermos in zero-G the day after the prohibition signing. The dent was still there, in Yarrow's hand, 287 years later. All 12 in sequence, bridge modules extending. The mechanical arms began to deploy. 12 barges, 12 bridge modules, each arm locking into its counterpart with a precision that had taken 3 generations to perfect. Samira thought of her daughter's chalk drawings. She thought of the word bridge, and how it appeared 7 times in a document the galaxy had never read. "Time to full lock?" she asked. 4 minutes, Yarrow said. Then after a pause, 32 seconds. Samira looked at the defense platforms. They were still silent, still watching, still filing this under routine transit. She smiled. It was the same smile Yira Tolan had worn 287 years ago, living only on the mouth, the eyes flat and patient. The bridge was not a warship. The bridge was not a weapon. The bridge was a promise, inherited across generations, written in a language the galaxy had never learned to read. And in 4 minutes and 32 seconds, the Prohibition would learn what it had failed to prohibit. In the Prohibition chamber, 287 years earlier, the ink had barely dried. Yira Tolan stood with her arms folded. It was the posture she used when she was most certain. The gray at her temples had appeared at 34 and never spread. She looked at Kale Voss with the patience of someone who had already decided to outlast him. "The enforcement infrastructure will be built this year," Voss said. "Surveillance satellites, inspection teams, officers across every sector. You will be watched. You will be measured. You will be found compliant, or you will be found in violation." Tolan did not answer. She looked at the silver ring on her right hand. She looked at the 12 representatives who stood behind her, each one carrying the same quiet certainty. They had not come to argue. They had come to sign. The carpenter's oath was read aloud that night in the vault by the 12th representative, the elderly woman with trembling hands. She read the word bridge 7 times. She read the word tool 11 times. She did not read the word warship once. The galaxy did not know this. The galaxy did not ask. 90 seconds to lock, Yarrow said. Samira watched the tactical display. The 12 barges were moving closer now, their bridge modules extending like fingers reaching across a gap that the galaxy had forgotten existed. The defense platforms remained silent. The Kavani had built a system to detect violations. They had never built a system to detect imagination. "Barge 4 reports shield harmonic stable," Samira said. "Barge 5 same." "Copy all green." Samira touched the photograph inside her helmet. Her daughter's face was smudged at the edge where her thumb had worn the print. She thought of the annual ceremony on Earth, where 12 descendants of the original signatories read the oath aloud in a room that smelled of old paper and black tea. She had been one of those descendants once. She had read the word bridge and understood for the first time what her grandmother's ring meant. The ring was on her finger now, earth metal, 400 years old, a promise passed down like the dent in Yarrow's thermos, like the word in the oath, like the patience that had built something the galaxy could not name. 30 seconds, Yarrow said. Samira looked at the defense platforms. They were still silent, still watching, still certain that the Prohibition covered all possibilities because it had never failed to cover them. She thought of Kale Voss, 8,000 years old, standing in the chamber that smelled of ozone and old stone. She thought of his institutional certainty, his belief that what could be named could be controlled, that what could be defined could be prohibited. The bridge modules locked. The 12 barges became one structure. And the Prohibition learned, in the silence that followed, that compliance itself could be a weapon. In the lowest tier of the Prohibition chamber, 287 years earlier, a small figure had watched the signing without speaking. Elder Thessaly was Vali, the smallest species in the chamber, seated at the lowest tier, never invited to speak. She was 312 years old. She had watched 847 reports filed across her lifetime. She had seen patterns that dominant species missed. She watched the 12 human representatives sign the document. She watched Yira Tolan's silver ring catch the pale blue light. She watched the elderly woman refuse to look at the paper. She noticed the number 12. 12 representatives, 12 signatures. 12 humans standing in a single row. She filed the observation away. She was Volley. She was small. She was never invited to speak. But she noticed. "Lock complete," Yarrow said. His voice was steady. 12 green lights, bridge assembled. Samira looked at the tactical display. The structure was 4,560 meters long. The individual shields, class 2.8 each, had combined geometrically, not additively, into something that exceeded class 12. The power output hummed at a frequency that matched 3 Covenant-class battlecruisers. The structure did not fire, it simply existed. The defense platforms, 16 of them, 2,400 meters each, armed with weapons that could reduce conventional warships to vapor, did not fire. They could not. The Prohibition had no protocol for a bridge. Samira keyed her comm. "Stillwater Actual, this is Barge 1. We are holding position, awaiting further instructions." The channel was silent. The defense platforms were silent. The galaxy for a long moment was silent. Then, from somewhere in the structure behind her, Samira heard a sound she had not expected. It was the sound of old paper turning. It was the sound of black tea being poured. It was the sound of 287 years of patience achieving weight. She touched the photograph inside her helmet. Her daughter was 7. She liked drawing animals with chalk. The bridge simply existed. And that was enough. Yira Tolan stood in the Prohibition chamber. 287 years later, her arms folded, her silver ring catching the pale blue light. She was 61 now. The gray at her temples had never spread. She looked at Kale Voss with the same patience she had worn at 34. "They are construction barges," she said. "Article 7, my signature on every filing." Voss's obsidian carapace reflected nothing. The blue light had gone dim. Construction barges do not move in combat formation. Tolan smiled. It lived only on her mouth. "We told you we were building a bridge." In the lowest tier, Elder Thessaly leaned forward. She had watched 847 reports. She had seen the anomaly: 12 barges, 12 shipyards, 12 routes, 12, for 287 years. She did not speak yet, she simply watched. And for the first time in 8,000 years, Kale Voss felt the vibration of a pattern he could not name. Voss did not move. His obsidian carapace caught the dim light and held it, the way stone holds water. For 8,000 years, he had stood at the center of that floor and delivered judgments that ended civilizations. He had never needed to step back. He did not step back now, but something in the set of his shoulders, a fraction of a degree, visible only to someone who had watched him for 287 years, changed. "Explain these vessels," he said. Tolan unfolded her arms. She let them fall to her sides, the silver ring catching the pale blue light. "Construction barges, Article 7, my signature on every filing for 34 years. Construction barges do not move in combat formation." "They are not in combat formation." Tolan's voice was flat, patient. The voice of a woman who had spent 3 decades standing in rooms where nobody wanted her to speak. "They are in bridge assembly formation. The distinction is in the filing. You have the documents." Voss turned, not toward her, toward the tactical feed that hovered above the chamber floor, relayed from Sector 9 Delta. The 12 barges hung in space, a single structure now, 4,560 meters of interconnected hull and transparent crystal. The defense platforms surrounded it, silent, their weapons charged and useless. In the lowest tier, Elder Thessaly leaned forward. Her small hands gripped the railing. She had watched 847 reports across her lifetime. She had seen the same number return in every audit, every inspection, every surveillance log filed by the Realloy clerks who measured human compliance with instruments designed by Kavani minds. 12. She opened her mouth. then closed it. She was Vali, she was small, she was never invited to speak. But she had counted. Samira Osai stood on the viewing deck of the Stillwater Bridge and looked through transparent crystal at the cold stars. The structure hummed around her, not the vibration of weapons, but the harmonic coupling of 12 civilian reactors in cascade. She could feel it in her boots, a frequency that matched her heartbeat. Pete Yarrow floated beside her, the dented thermos clipped to his belt. His grandfather had been an engineer. His father had been an engineer. He had spent his life understanding what the galaxy called construction equipment. "They're not hailing," he said. "They will." Samira touched the photograph inside her helmet. "They have to, it's in the protocol." "The Prohibition has no protocol for a bridge." Samira looked at him. Yarrow was 44, gray at the temples like Tolan, like every human who had carried this weight long enough. He smiled, but it was the same smile, living only on the mouth. "That's the point," she said. In the Prohibition chamber, Ambassador Droon shifted his weight. He was Korvathi, 1,200 years old, one of the original voters for the Prohibition. He had watched Yira Tolan sign in blue ink 287 years ago. He had watched her stand with her arms folded, while the galaxy built its surveillance network around her species. He stepped forward now, his ancient joints creaking. "High Arbiter, the vessels are unarmed. The scans confirm this. We have no grounds for enforcement action." Voss did not look at him. He was watching the tactical feed, watching the 12 barges, watching something he could not name. "The formation," he said. "The geometric precision. This is not construction behavior." "It is bridge behavior," Tolan said. "We filed the plans 200 years ago. You approved them." Droon turned to her. For the first time in 1,200 years, his voice carried something other than institutional certainty. "You filed plans for a bridge between colonies, not a bridge that locks into a single structure. Not a bridge with shield harmonics exceeding class 12. Tolan smiled. "The filing said bridge. We built a bridge. The Prohibition said nothing about how large a bridge could be." Vex, the Realloy clerk, stood at the edge of the chamber with his data slate. He was young, 11 cycles into a career that would last perhaps 30. He had filed 847 reports on human compliance. Each one had been exemplary. Each one had been thorough. Each one had been wrong. He looked at his slate, the numbers blurred. He had been trained to audit what could be categorized. The structure at Sector 9 Delta had no category. He keyed a query. The system returned, "No matching protocol." He keyed it again, the same response. Vex looked up at the tactical feed, at the 12 barges. At the bridge that was not a warship, not a weapon, not anything his training had prepared him to name. He thought of his predecessor, 287 years earlier, who had established the surveillance network, who had measured humanity and found them small, who had never asked what they were measuring for. His hands trembled, not from fear, from the first faint vibration of a pattern he could not name. "The word," Thessaly said. Every head turned. It was the first time a Vali had spoken in the Prohibition chamber in 4,000 years. Her voice was small, but the chamber was built to carry whispers. Voss looked down at her. "Elder." "The word." Thessaly gripped the railing with both hands. She was 312 years old. She had watched 847 reports. She had seen the anomaly in everyone, filed away in the margins where Realloy clerks noted routine observations. In every human filing, every route plan, every shipyard allocation. The number 12. 12 barges, 12 shipyards, 12 routes, for 287 years. She paused. The chamber was silent. "You audited them," she said. "You never learned to count." On the Stillwater Bridge, Samira felt the structure shift. Not a weapon deployment. A subtle realignment of the 12 modules, the geometric precision of the shield cascade adjusting to maintain harmonic balance. The defense platforms tracked the movement with their targeting arrays, but their fire control systems could not lock. Because there was nothing to lock onto, the bridge was not a threat, it was not an enemy. It was simply a structure that occupied the space the galaxy had forgotten to regulate. Yarrow unclipped his thermos. He did not drink from it. He simply held it, feeling the dent where his grandfather's thumb had worn the metal smooth. "How long?" he asked. "Until they understand." Samira looked at the defense platforms. "Years, decades, maybe never. And until they act." "They can't act." Samira touched the photograph. "The Prohibition has no protocol for a bridge. They built a system to detect violations. They never built a system to detect imagination." Voss stood in the center of the chamber. The tactical feed still hovered above him, showing the impossible structure. He had presided over 12,000 judgments. He had never been wrong. But he had never been uncertain. "Article 7, he said slowly, defines construction equipment, vessels under Class 3 shielding, unarmed, non-military designation." He turned to Tolan. "Your bridge exceeds Class 12. The power output matches 3 battlecruisers. By any functional definition, it is a warship." "By any functional definition," Tolan agreed. "But the Prohibition does not use functional definitions. It uses categorical definitions, and the category is bridge." She stepped forward. The silver ring caught the light. "You asked us not to build warships. We did not. You asked us to comply. We did. You built a system to watch us. We let you watch. For 287 years, High Arbiter. We filed every plan. We routed every barge. We signed every document. And in all that time, you never asked what we were building." Voss's carapace reflected nothing. The blue light had gone dim. "Because you assumed," Tolan said, "that what you could name you could control, that what you could define you could prohibit. But humans do not build within definitions. We build around them." In the Earth Vault, 12 descendants of the original signatories stood in a room that smelled of old paper and black tea. The Carpenter's Oath lay open on a stand, its pages yellowed, its ink faded to the color of dried blood. The eldest descendant, a woman with gray at her temples, the same gray that had appeared on Yira Tolan at 34, read aloud. "We, the builders, do swear that our tools shall never be turned to war, that our bridges shall connect, not divide, that our hands shall craft only that which serves life." She turned the page. The word bridge appeared, then again, then again. 7 times in 12 pages. The descendants did not translate the document. They did not need to. They had inherited the meaning the way they had inherited the silver rings, the dented thermoses, the patience that outlasted institutions. Back in the chamber, Droon stepped closer to the tactical feed. His ancient eyes narrowed. "The shield cascade," he said. "It's geometric, not additive. Each Class 2.8 shield interacts with the others at specific angles. The combined field isn't 12 times stronger, it's—" he paused. "It's something else." "Exponential," Thessaly said. Her small voice carried in the silence. "They built the shields to combine geometrically. Each module reinforces the next. The whole is not the sum of its parts. The whole is something the Prohibition never imagined." Voss looked at her. For 8,000 years, he had stood at the center of this chamber and delivered judgments that ended civilizations. He had never looked down at the lowest tier. He had never needed to. He looked down now. "You notice this," he said, "in the reports." "I noticed the number," Thessaly said. 12, always 12. In a galaxy of 12,000 species, humans filed everything in 12s. I thought it was cultural preference. I thought it was—" She stopped. "I thought it was small. I thought it was quaint. I did not think it was architecture." On the bridge, Samira felt the harmonic coupling reach peak resonance. The 12 reactors sang in unison, a cord that filled the transparent crystal viewing deck with light. She looked at Yarrow. He was crying silently, the tears floating in zero-G. "My grandfather," he said. "He dropped that thermos the day after the signing. He was so angry, so helpless. He wanted to fight. He wanted to build weapons, but the oath said no. The oath said tools. The oath said bridges." "He built one," Samira said. "We all did, one piece at a time, one generation at a time." She looked at the defense platforms. They were still silent, still watching, still certain that the prohibition covered all possibilities because it had never failed to cover them. But it had never been tested against patience. Voss turned from the tactical feed. He walked to the edge of the circular floor, to the place where the black basalt met the lowest tier. He stood before Thessaly, 8,000 years of institutional certainty weighing on his obsidian shoulders. "What do they want?" he asked. Thessaly looked up at him. She was small. She was Vali. She was never invited to speak. But she had watched 847 reports. She had seen what the dominant species missed. "They don't want anything," she said. "They already have it. They have a bridge. They have compliance. They have 287 years of filings that prove beyond any audit that they never violated your prohibition." She paused. "What they want, High Arbiter, is for you to understand that the prohibition was never the point. The point was what they built while you were watching for violations." Voss looked at Tolan. She stood with her arms folded, the silver ring catching the pale blue light. She was 61 now. The gray at her temples had never spread. She looked at him with the patience of someone who had already decided to outlast him. "The carpenter's oath," she said, "was never a deception, it was a promise. We did not build warships, we built something else." "And what," Voss asked, "is that?" Tolan unfolded her arms. She pointed to the tactical feed, to the 12 barges, to the bridge that occupied the space the galaxy had forgotten to regulate. "It's a bridge," she said. "We told you. You simply didn't understand what that meant." The chamber was silent. The 3,000 luminescence orbs cast pale light on 12,000 species names. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor was black basalt, polished by 8,000 years of verdicts. And for the first time in 8,000 years, Kale Voss did not know what verdict to deliver. Vex, the Realloy clerk, looked at his slate. The query still returned no matching protocol. He thought of the 847 reports he had filed, the 847 times he had measured humanity and found them small, the 847 times he had been wrong. He began to type a new report. Report 848, 3 sentences. He did not know what would happen after he filed it. He did not know if his career would end. He did not know if anything would change. But he knew, with the certainty of a clerk who had spent 11 cycles learning to categorize, that the category he needed did not exist. And that was the point. Vex hit send on report 848. The slate chirped. The sound was small, but in the prohibition chamber, where silence had ruled for 8,000 years, it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head turned. Voss did not turn. He was still looking at the tactical feed, at the bridge that occupied space his institution had never learned to name. But his carapace caught the light differently now, not the flat reflection of certainty, but the fractured gleam of something cracking. "What did you file?" Droon asked. The Korvathi ambassador's voice was dry, the voice of a species that had seen civilizations rise and fall in the time it took humans to gray at the temples. Vex looked at his slate, then at the floor. "A report," he said, "on the structure, on the—" He stopped. "There is no category. The system returned no matching protocol. I filed it under anomalous construction." "Anomalous," Tolan repeated. She smiled, and for the first time in 287 years the smile reached her eyes. "Yes, that will do." On the Stillwater Bridge, Samira felt the harmonic cascade shift. Not a weapon charging, not a shield flaring. A subtle realignment, the 12 reactors adjusting their song to match a frequency that had not existed until this moment. The transparent crystal of the viewing deck showed the defense platforms in perfect clarity, 16 silent mountains, their weapons hot, their fire control systems cycling through queries that returned the same answer. No target. "They're running diagnostics," Yarrow said. He floated beside her, the dented thermos spinning slowly at his hip. "The platforms, they're trying to classify us." "They can't." Samira touched the photograph inside her helmet. Her daughter was 7. She liked drawing animals with chalk. "We're not a threat. We're not a target. We're not anything their system was built to see." Yarrow looked at the platforms, then at the bridge around them, the 4,560 meters of interconnected hull, the crystal decks, the civilian reactors singing in harmonic cascade. "How long did your family know?" "Know what?" "That this was the plan, that the oath was," he stopped, "that it meant this." Samira was quiet for a moment. The bridge hummed. The stars were cold. "My grandmother carried the ring before me, her grandmother before her. They never said the words, 'This is the plan.' They said, 'This is who we are.' They said, 'We build bridges.' I thought they meant small ones. I thought they meant," she looked at the platforms, "I thought they meant between people, between colonies. I didn't understand they meant between everything the galaxy forgot to connect." In the prohibition chamber, Voss walked to the wall. He placed one hand on the black basalt, on the 12,000 species names carved there. His fingers traced a groove, not a name, but a number, a date, a judgment from 6,000 years ago, when the Kavani had prohibited plasma lances across 400 systems. He had delivered that judgment himself. He had never questioned it. "The prohibition," he said, not turning, "has governed 16,000 technologies across 9,000 years. It has never been circumvented, never been evaded, never been." He stopped. The word would not come. "Outgrown," Thessaly said. Voss turned. He looked down at the small volley in the lowest tier. For 8,000 years he had never looked down. He had never needed to. "Outgrown," he repeated. The word was foreign in his mouth, like speaking a language he had not learned. "The humans did not break your law," Thessaly said. Her voice was steady now, the voice of someone who had spent 312 years watching patterns form. "They built around it. For 287 years. While you watched for warships, they built something you had not learned to fear." "And what," Voss asked, "have I not learned to fear?" Thessaly looked at Tolan, then back at Voss. "Patience," she said. "You have never learned to fear patience." Tolan stepped forward. She walked to the edge of the circular floor, to the place where Voss stood. She was 61. The gray at her temples had never spread. The silver ring on her right hand caught the pale blue light and held it. 287 years ago," she said, "you stood in this chamber and told us what we could not build. You did not ask what we would build instead. You assumed that prohibition and creation were opposites, that to be forbidden from war was to be rendered harmless." She raised her hand. The ring glinted. "This belonged to my grandmother. She was at the signing. She refused to look at the document after she signed it. Do you know why?" Voss did not answer. "Because she was already planning," Tolan said. "Because she knew that the prohibition was not the end of the conversation. It was the beginning of a longer one. A conversation that would outlast you, that would outlast your satellites, your inspections, your 3,000 officers." She lowered her hand. "The carpenter's oath was not a deception, high arbiter. It was a promise. We promised not to build warships. We promised to build tools. We promised that our bridges would connect, not divide." She paused. "We did not promise to build small bridges." On the bridge, Samira felt the structure shudder, not from impact, from recognition. The defense platforms had stopped cycling diagnostics. They had reached the end of their queries. They had found the edge of what they knew. And beyond that edge, there was only a bridge. They're powering down, Yarrow said. His voice was barely a whisper. The platforms, their weapons, they're going cold. Samira looked. He was right. The targeting arrays on the nearest platform had dimmed. The energy signatures that had hummed at combat readiness were fading to standby, not because the platforms had been ordered to stand down. Because they had been ordered to fire, and they could not. Because the bridge was not a warship. Because the Prohibition had no protocol for a bridge. Because 287 years of institutional certainty had encountered something it had never imagined, compliance that was stronger than defiance. Samira, Yarrow said, "Look." She looked. On the tactical display a new signal had appeared, not from the platforms, not from the bridge, from the Prohibition chamber itself. A broadcast on the open channel. No encryption, no protocol, just a voice. Voss's voice. In the chamber, Voss stood at the center of the circular floor. The tactical feed still hovered above him, showing the bridge, the platforms, the impossible geometry of human patience. He had not moved from that spot in 8,000 years. He did not move now. But he spoke. "This chamber," he said, "has witnessed 12,000 judgments. It has ended civilizations. It has prohibited technologies that could have reshaped the galaxy. It has never been wrong." He paused. The 3,000 luminescence orbs cast pale light on 12,000 species names. The ceiling was lost in shadow. The floor was black basalt, polished by verdicts. "Until today," he said. The chamber was silent. Droon's ancient joints creaked as he shifted his weight. Vex's slate chirped again, another query, another no-matching protocol. Thessaly gripped the railing with both hands. "High Arbiter," Droon said. His voice was not the voice of an ambassador now. It was the voice of someone who had watched a truth form over 1,200 years and could no longer deny its shape. "What is your judgment?" Voss looked at Tolan. She stood with her arms folded, the silver ring catching the light. She looked at him with the patience of someone who had already decided to outlast him. "I have no judgment," Voss said. "The Prohibition has no protocol for a bridge." Tolan unfolded her arms. She walked to the tactical feed. She reached up, a small gesture, human, almost casual, and touched the image of the Stillwater Bridge. The 12 barges. The 4,560 meters of crystal and hull. The harmonic cascade that sang in frequencies no weapon had ever used. "You asked us to comply," she said. "We complied. You asked us not to build warships. We did not. You built a system to detect violations. We gave you no violations to detect." She turned to face the chamber. To face the 12,000 species names. To face the 3,000 luminescence orbs that had watched 8,000 years of verdicts. "For 287 years," she said, "the galaxy has asked the wrong question. It has asked, are humans building warships? It has never asked, what are humans building instead?" She looked at Voss. "The answer is simple. We are building bridges. We have always been building bridges. The Prohibition said nothing about bridges. That was the point." On the bridge, Samira heard the words through the open channel. She touched the photograph inside her helmet. Her daughter was 7. She liked drawing animals with chalk. "We didn't build warships," she whispered. "We built something else." Yarrow looked at her. The dented thermos spun slowly at his hip. "What do we do now?" Samira looked at the defense platforms. They were cold now, silent, watching. The way they had watched for 287 years, measuring and filing and finding humanity small. "We wait," she said. "We have waited 287 years. We can wait longer." "But the galaxy knows now. They'll adapt. They'll rewrite the Prohibition. They'll try," Samira said. "But they will not understand because the bridge is not the point. The bridge is the proof. The proof that compliance can be architecture, that patience can be power, that what you do not prohibit, you do not control." She looked at the stars through the transparent crystal. They will come to understand, or they will not. Either way, the bridge stands. In the chamber, Voss walked to the wall where the prohibition was inscribed. He placed his hand on the text, the 847 technologies, the 16,000 judgments, the 9,000 years of institutional certainty. His obsidian fingers traced the words Warship Prohibition. He found the definition: Class 2.8 shielding, directed energy weapons, military designation, combat formation, aggressive posture. He did not find the word bridge. He would never find it, because it had never been there. Because the Kavani, in all their 8,000 years of precision, had never imagined that a bridge could be anything other than small, other than harmless, other than beneath their notice. Voss turned. He looked at Tolan, at Thessaly. At Droon, who was already turning away, his ancient shoulders bowed. At Vex, who was still typing, report 848 growing into something that would end his career and begin something else. I will remain in this chamber, Voss said. For as long as the prohibition stands, I will deliver no more judgments about human vessels. I will not be removed. I will not be defeated. I will simply... He stopped. I will simply be here, watching, as I have always watched, but I will no longer be certain of what I see. He walked to the center of the floor. He stood where he had stood for 8,000 years, but his posture had changed. Not doubt. Something older than doubt. Something that lived in the space between what he knew and what he had failed to imagine. The vibration of a pattern he could not name. Droon left the chamber. He did not speak. He did not look back. He walked through the corridors of the conclave, past the 847 surveillance satellites that had watched humanity for 287 years and found them compliant, past the 42 inspection teams that had measured their vessels and found them small, past the 3,000 enforcement officers who had filed reports on a species that had never given them anything to report. He walked to a shuttle. He programmed a course for Earth. He did not know what he would find there. He did not know if he would understand it when he found it. But he knew, with the certainty of a species that had lived 1,200 years and learned that certainty itself was fragile, that he had to see the vault, the room that smelled of old paper and black tea, the document that had never been translated, the promise the galaxy had not understood. Vex finished Report 848. He read it once, 3 sentences. Then he filed it. He did not know if anyone would read it. He did not know if the conclave would adapt, or collapse, or simply continue in the way institutions continued, by pretending that the anomaly was temporary, that the bridge was a fluke, that humans would eventually build something the prohibition could name. But he knew, as he set down his slate, that he would never file another report on human compliance, because the category no longer existed, because the humans had not complied. They had transcended. And transcendence, he realized, was not something you filed. Tolan stood alone in the chamber. Voss was at the center, silent, his obsidian carapace reflecting nothing. Thessaly had returned to her seat in the lowest tier, small and quiet, her hands folded in her lap. The 3,000 luminescence orbs cast pale light on 12,000 species names. Tolan looked at her silver ring. She thought of her grandmother who had refused to look at the document 287 years ago, who had known, even then, that the prohibition was not the end, that compliance was not surrender, that what you could not build in 1 generation, you could build in 12. She walked to the door. She did not look back at Voss. She did not need to. She had outlasted him, not by defeating him, not by breaking his rules, by building something his rules had never imagined. The door sealed behind her. The chamber was silent. The prohibition stood, unviolated, unbroken, and utterly irrelevant. And in Sector 9 Delta, the Stillwater Bridge hummed, 12 reactors, 12 modules, 12 barges that had become one structure, singing a frequency that no weapon had ever used. Droon's shuttle touched down on Earth at dusk. The sky was the color of old copper, the kind of light that made everything look like a memory already fading. He had traveled for 3 days through sectors he had governed for centuries, past surveillance satellites that had watched humanity and found them small, past inspection teams that had measured their vessels and filed reports on their compliance. He walked from the landing pad to a building that looked like nothing gray stone, a single door, no markings. The kind of building that institutions built when they wanted to be forgotten. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and black tea. Samira Osai stood on the Stillwater Bridge and watched a star go nova on the far edge of Sector 9. The light took years to reach her, but she watched it anyway, the way her grandmother had watched stars from Earth, the way her daughter would watch them from somewhere she had not yet imagined. Yarrow floated beside her, drinking from the dented thermos. The tea was cold. It had been cold for 287 years, passed down through generations who had learned that some things did not need to be warm to sustain you. "They're sending a delegation," he said, "from the conclave, 12 species. They want to tour the bridge." "Let them." Samira touched the photograph inside her helmet. Her daughter was 7. She liked drawing animals with chalk. "The bridge is open. It has always been open. That's what bridges are." Yarrow looked at her. "You think they'll understand?" "No," Samira smiled, and for the first time since the lock the smile reached her eyes. "But they'll walk across it, and walking is understanding enough." Droon found the vault at the end of a corridor lined with portraits. Humans, all of them gray at the temples, wearing silver rings, holding dented thermoses, standing in rooms that smelled of old paper and black tea. He walked past them without stopping. He had seen enough portraits in his 1,200 years. He had seen enough faces that looked patient, because they had learned that patience was the only weapon left. The vault door was open. Inside, 12 descendants stood in a circle around a document on a stand. The pages were yellowed. The ink was faded. The words were in a language Droon did not speak. He stepped inside. The descendants did not stop reading. They had read this document every year for 287 years. They would read it for 287 more. The presence of a Korvathi ambassador meant nothing to them. They had learned that institutions came and went, but the oath remained. Droon looked at the document. He could not read the words, but he could see the shape of them, the way the letters formed patterns, the way the word bridge appeared again and again, not as a metaphor, not as a promise, but as a blueprint. He understood then what year a Tolan had meant, what the 12th representative had known, her hands trembling, refusing to look at the prohibition she had signed, what every human who had grayed at their temples had carried in their bones. They had not been signing a surrender, they had been signing a map. In the prohibition chamber, Kale Voss stood at the center of the circular floor. The tactical feed still hovered above him, showing the bridge, the platforms, the empty space where judgment should have been. He had not moved in days. He had not spoken. The 3,000 luminescence orbs cast pale light on 12,000 species names, and his obsidian carapace reflected nothing. A Realloy clerk entered, not Vex, someone younger, someone who had not filed 847 reports and learned that categories could fail. The clerk carried a slate. The slate carried a question. "High Arbiter," the clerk said, "the conclave requests guidance. The human structure remains. The prohibition remains. What is the judgment?" Voss did not turn. He did not look at the slate. He looked at the wall where the prohibition was inscribed, at the 847 technologies, at the 16,000 judgments, at the 9,000 years of institutional certainty that had never imagined a bridge. "There is no judgment," he said. His voice was the same voice that had ended civilizations, but it was quieter now. The weight of 8,000 years had not lifted. It had simply found a new shape. "The prohibition has no protocol for a bridge." The clerk waited. Voss did not speak again. The clerk left. The chamber was silent. The orbs cast pale light. The ceiling was lost in shadow. And Voss stood there, as he would stand for 3,000 more years, never delivering another judgment about human vessels, never removed, never defeated, simply exiled from his own certainty. Tolan walked onto the Stillwater Bridge on the 7th day. She had not been there since the lock. She had been in the chamber, in corridors, in rooms where nobody wanted her to speak. But now the bridge was complete, and she walked across it the way her grandmother had walked across fields on Earth, the way her daughter would walk across worlds she had not yet imagined. Samira met her at the center. The transparent crystal showed the stars beneath their feet. The 12 reactors hummed in harmonic cascade. The defense platforms were cold, silent, watching. "You built it," Tolan said. "We built it." Samira touched the photograph inside her helmet. "All of us, one piece at a time, one generation at a time." Tolan looked at the ring on her hand. Earth metal, 400 years old. She thought of the document in the vault, the word bridge, written 7 times in 12 pages, the promise that had outlasted every institution that had tried to contain it. "The galaxy will adapt," she said. "They will rewrite the prohibition. They will find new categories, new definitions, new ways to name what we have built." "Yes," Samira said. "And we will build around them again." "Yes." Tolan smiled. The gray at her temples had never spread. The patience in her bones had never wavered. She looked at the stars through the transparent crystal, at the cold light that had traveled years to reach her, at the bridge that connected everything the galaxy had forgotten to connect. "We didn't build warships," she said. "We built something else." Samira nodded. She did not ask what. She knew. The bridge knew. The 12 barges that had become one structure knew. The galaxy would learn, or it would not. Either way, the bridge stood. Droon left the vault without speaking. He walked back through the corridor of portraits, past the gray temples and the silver rings and the dented thermoses. He walked past the building that looked like nothing, past the landing pad, past the old copper sky. He did not return to the conclave. He did not file a resignation. He simply walked, the way humans had walked for 287 years, one step at a time, towards something he could not yet name. In his pocket, he carried a page from the Carpenter's Oath. He could not read the words, but he could feel the weight of them, the weight of old paper and black tea, the weight of a promise that had outlasted every judgment ever delivered. He understood finally what compliance meant, not obedience, not surrender, architecture. Vex sat in a small room on the outer edge of Sector 7. He had left the conclave. He had left the filing. He had left the categories that could not contain what humans had built. In front of him, a child played with blocks, human, 7 years old. Gray at the temples already, the way stress marked their species. She was building something, not a weapon, not a ship, a bridge. Small, wooden, connecting 2 piles of books that served as mountains. Vex watched her. He thought of Report 848. He thought of the no-matching protocol that had ended his career and begun something else. He thought of the 12 barges, the 12 modules, the 12 reactors singing in harmonic cascade. The child looked up at him. "Do you want to help?" Vex did not answer. He was Realloy. He was a clerk. He had spent 11 cycles learning to categorize, and he had learned that the most important things could not be filed. He reached for a block. He placed it on the bridge. The child smiled. 3,000 years later, the Stillwater Bridge still stood. New species joined the Covenant and learned the case study. Humans never broke a rule. They simply built outside it. The prohibition remained on record, unviolated, unbroken, and utterly irrelevant. The Carpenter's Oath was read aloud every year, still in the original words, still by 12 descendants, still in a room that smelled of old paper and black tea. The galaxy had learned to attend, not because it feared what humans would build, because it no longer knew what building meant. Kale Voss remained in the prohibition chamber. His obsidian carapace had dulled to the color of old stone. The 3,000 luminescence orbs had been replaced many times, but the chamber still smelled of ozone. The walls still held 12,000 species names. The floor was still black basalt, polished by verdicts that no longer came. He stood at the center. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply watched, the way he had watched for 8,000 years, the way he would watch until the orbs went dark and the names crumbled and the chamber itself forgot what it had been built to contain. On the bridge, a child ran across the transparent crystal. Human, 7 years old, gray at the temples. She carried a piece of chalk and a photograph of a woman who had built something the galaxy could not name. She stopped at the center. She looked down at the stars through the crystal. She drew a line with her chalk, a bridge, small and temporary, connecting 2 points that had never been connected before. Then she ran on, the chalk mark fading behind her, the bridge standing beneath her, the stars cold and patient and waiting for whatever would be built next.